government, or rather the finance ministry, dropping a mini bombshell in the financial market. An innocuous Securities and Insurance Amendment and Validation Act was passed last weekend, decreeing that ULIP shall be regulated by the insurance regulator and not by the SEBI. But a much larger portion of that amendment ordinance was devoted to amending the Reserve Bank of India Act, SEBI and IRDA Acts as well, to introduce a joint committee comprising the finance minister and all the regulators. This committee is henceforth to sit in judgment of regulatory turf issues. All fine. But this changes a basic principle of the RBI Act. The RBI, while it is a creature of Parliament and hence answerable to the Finance Ministry, is structured to be independent. It has no government nominee with any voting rights on its board. Only the Finance Secretary attends board meetings, but as an observer. He has no voting rights in the RBI board. By making the RBI subservient to this committee headed by the Finance Minister in its market decisions, has the independence of the RBI been trimmed in any fashion, is the question we are asking. Joining us are Dr. S. Narayan, former Finance Secretary, and Dr. Shankar Acharya, economist and formerly advisor to the Finance Ministry. Dr. Narayan, well, first let me ask you a more basic question, since you have been in the Finance Ministry. Do you think the ministry required an ordinance to solve the ULIP issue? They have directors on the boards of IRDA and SEBI. Also, the Finance Ministry is the author and the final interpreter of both the acts, the IRDA and the SEBI Act. Also, thirdly, and very importantly, they can give directions to both these regulators. Was it incompetent in the way in which the whole ULIP issue was handled?
Lata, I think I would start at slightly a different, I'll come back to your questions, start at a slightly different end of the slate and just try to understand what exactly the Finance Ministry has done. As you know, the ULIP itself is a paper that is put out by the insurance companies where the insurance content is very small. That means that the money is put into the stock market by the companies, and up to the time of maturity they carry the life insurance risk. And once it is mature, then the returns which have been returns from the stock exchange or the markets are passed on to the beneficiary. Therefore, the risk carriage, if you really look at the ULIP, is for a very short period from the time of subscription to the time of maturity, and this is a comparatively a small risk. Other than that, they are essentially financial market instruments and securities. What this amendment, what this ordinance does, most importantly, is to classify ULIPs as not as securities. That is, a section 27A, 27B of the Securities Act will not apply to ULIPs. Now, this is a very serious matter, which means that you have an instrument which is essentially using equities, but it is not classified as a security, which means the investor continues to be, now becomes at much greater risk than he was before. I mean, I'll carry this forward and say, if you just compare the regulators, SEBI and IRDA, obviously SEBI is much more closely attuned to the market, is able to take stricter action against the people who are playing the financial markets, whereas IRDA has not been, in the last 10-15 years, has not been so active and so strong in regulation. So you have given to the weaker player, and you have given them an instrument, and that instrument is actually an equity and a financial market instrument, and have removed the word security.
What you are saying about the Finance Ministry's decision is that it is an extremely questionable one, to put it euphemistically, and downright wrong if you interpret ULIPs as securities, as most people would interpret them. But let me not get to the merit of that question, since I am tackling a totally different philosophical question. Dr. Acharya, the ordinance doesn't just solve the ULIP jurisdiction, as Dr. Narayan is pointing out. It could have just restricted itself to the ULIP issue, but it goes further and sets up this committee. And what makes one, what disturbs one is the RBI board under the RBI Act was very carefully constituted to avoid direct intervention by the government or by the Finance Ministry. Like I told you, the board, as you know, does not have any voting member from the government. Do you think this committee compromises the independence of the RBI? And secondly, would you worry that this committee and this ordinance was brought in without any public debate on the issue?
Well, I think there are two separate issues there. One is the ambit of the Joint Coordination Committee, one product or more, and the other, I think, is the question of how it should have been brought about, by ordinance or some other means. I guess my view on this is that if you are going to have some sort of coordination mechanism to essentially resolve dispute issues over jurisdiction, over products, then logically it seems to me that it does make sense to have an umbrella approach. That is, you set up a committee which is empowered to look at not just one product like ULIPs, but similar or other products which may come up in the future and cannot be anticipated today. So on that one, I think a multi-product approach, if you like, makes sense. On whether this should have been done by ordinance or some other means, I think that I think ordinance generally should be a bit of a last resort, and since it is in the nature of legislation, it's much better if legislation or amendments to legislation go through normal parliamentary processes. And so it sort of beats me why this had to be done through ordinance.
Well, Dr. Narayan, let me toss this question to you. One, once again coming back to the Finance Ministry's powers, the Finance Ministry has power to issue directions. So directions could be issued. Was an ordinance required at all, even for ULIP? And secondly, are you uncomfortable that this committee had to come in through an ordinance? That requires debate, doesn't it? You are directly bringing the RBI under under a Finance Ministry led committee, which is not the design of that body. Would you worry that this has been done without any debate?
I think if you just go back 6 or 8 weeks, we have a position where the Finance Minister is actually telling both these people, the RDA as well as the SEBI, that he is not going to intervene and they will have to settle the matter in court. And after that, both these regulators approach the court and the matter is pending in the court, and the government also impledes itself.
No, I'm questioning, my question is a little ahead of that, sir. Need that position have been taken at all?
I'm coming to that. So suddenly now government, suddenly the Finance Ministry, without consulting the regulators, without consulting the players, comes out with an ordinance. So what has happened in the interregnum to make the Finance Ministry take this step? There can only be, and one believes that it was purely an internal Finance Ministry kind of a consultation that led to this. So one can only believe that it is a measure, because actually what has happened was this budget. During the budget, the Finance Minister announces that there is going to be a joint committee, which is Supervisory Regulatory Committee. There's a lot of media criticism and there's a lot of argument about whether it's necessary or not. The Finance Minister backs out. He says no, and the Finance Secretary comes out and says that this is going to be only a kind of a talking shop, a kind of a clearinghouse kind of information. And all this happens during in between April and May. And now suddenly you have an ordinance empowering the Finance Minister. So obviously you have gone back to a situation where you have a legislated body which can give directions to the regulator. I think this is a very, very confusing way of taking large-scale policy decisions on the financial and regulatory markets. So I'm very, very concerned that things should happen in this manner.
Well, let me get Dr. Acharya also in on this. While the Reserve Bank is a creature of Parliament, Dr. Acharya, and has to report to the Finance Ministry, to the Parliament through the Finance Ministry, de facto it has actually enjoyed more independence. It has resisted financial products which it feels would have endangered financial stability. We know of several clashes in the past. Would you say that this de facto power that the RBI has so far enjoyed will now lessen?
I do agree with you that it is vitally important to preserve both whatever is the de jure independence of the RBI, and that is not absolute, as you pointed out, as well as perhaps equally and perhaps more important, what is the de facto independence of the RBI on a wide range of matters, on issues of financial stability, on issues of monetary policy, on issues of exchange rate management, on issues of financial sector development, and so forth. Now, that de facto independence is not absolute, and nobody expects it to be absolute, but I think the culture of gradually having evolved that autonomy and independence has been a long, hard sort of journey in which not just the RBI but the Finance Ministry of past years has participated, and it would be important, I think, to avoid steps, whether in the form of ordinance or any other measure for that matter, which in some sense are seen to ride roughshod over this independence. That doesn't mean that you can't touch the RBI from the government point of view. That cannot be. But I certainly am also uncomfortable, like I think you are, that this way of kind of amending the RBI Act, which should be treated, I think, with some respect and regard, without any significant discussion in Parliament or outside or in any parliamentary committee, is a little uncomfortable to me, and I wish it had not happened this way.
Well, Dr. Narayan, you know, you have been in the Finance Ministry and have been a long-time watcher of the ministry and its relation with various regulators. To be fair, the Finance Ministry has been instrumental in getting the best minds on to RBI, and the culture of independence at RBI has also been preserved because the Finance Ministry has allowed it to be. It appears that a certain different culture is growing. Do you think a long-term harm has been done, or do you think personalities will continue to make a difference, and maybe there will not be much of a change in the role and a salutary role that RBI has played?
I think most importantly, the relationship between the Finance Ministry and RBI has been one always of a very, very healthy respect and mutual admiration of the kind of roles that each has to play. And I think that a coordinated mechanism has worked extremely well for the last 60 years or so. To bring in an overarching regulation where the finance minister in person would have the last word on different kind of regulatory oversight, to me is very worrying. It's very worrying because if you just think of the professional expertise available within each of the regulators, RBI has enormous professional expertise, and you could see the way in which they managed the 2008 and 2009 crisis, the kind of studies and research that they brought in. You can see the way in which SEBI has deepened its knowledge over the financial markets over the last 8 to 10 years. And to say that these decisions would be decided by a kind of a board meeting kind situation, for me is very worrying. And I also wish that it had not happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, one final question. So now the FSDC will possibly not be appointed. Does the HLCC also become a dinosaur?
Yeah, I think the HLCC would have lost its relevance now because of this new ordinance, and I suppose what you have in fact is the FSBC or whatever it is in a slightly different name. Because it is still in the Finance Ministry. The Finance Ministry, very interestingly, they have not said who will be the members, how will it be serviced, what will be the administrative mechanism, what kind of problems it will look at, what kind of problem, does the regulator have to bring problems to the committee, or the committee will recognize them automatically? I mean, the kind of the bureaucratic maze kind of keeps growing. So in a way you have created perhaps something which may become over a period of time, if not handled carefully, something that you wish you had not created.